My name is Roy.
Hi, this is Michael.
And we're in our episode of Race Economics Clue Book. Today talking about demand and factor, and today's factor is going to be labor.
Okay.
Now remember, our four factors of production are entrepreneurship, capital, land, and labor.
Yes.
So labor is one of the most basic and also one of the most fundamental forms of our production factors.
Yes.
And so, what exactly goes into demand for labor? How does hiring work? How does employment work? And how do companies determine how many laborers or workers to hire and at what wage? And so, first, labor is all surrounding the law of diminishing marginal productivity, which is basically the law that surrounds all labor and capital to begin with, both labor and capital. And labor, for instance, once we increase number of workers, we look at marginal return per worker, marginal product per worker.
Yeah, the output per worker.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we see once we hire the first worker of our company or a firm, we see a marginal product or marginal return of four units of output.
Yeah.
And then our second worker has a marginal output of 7 units of output. So you see
about
that
6. Yeah, actually,
about 6 to 7. And so our marginal output per worker is not right now increasing at low levels of worker numbers.
Yeah.
But then once we reach our third worker, we see the curve start to shift down.
Yeah. But it's still the 7. But getting the fourth, we're gonna get about only 5.
Yeah.
Getting the 5, the fifth worker, we go back to only about 3.
Yes. And so in this range, we see diminishing marginal returns, which means the marginal returns are still positive, which means increasing workers still increase overall total output, but the marginal output or marginal returns per worker is now decreasing.
Yes.
So originally, the second worker added about 6 to 7 units of output, but now the third worker adds less than that, adds only less than that amount, and then the fourth worker only adds about slightly less than 5 units of output. And so we see that diminishing, and then eventually it reaches the point where there's so many workers, around 8 workers, that their marginal return is actually negative.
Yeah, basically that's actually very reasonable because think about first employee enjoys all the office room, right? Like the computers, all the capitals. Okay, so when we have more and more employees, the capital constraints effect becomes apparent because we may not have enough land.
Yeah.
We may not have enough office room and may not have enough computers.
Yes.
Right.
So
the marginal product per employee becomes actually this shape is first goes up then goes down because of the diminishing capital available for per new employee.
Yes.
Okay. So actually we discussed this in the previous episode. If you guys can still remember, can go back to the the early episode to see the law of diminishing marginal productivity.
Yes.
Okay.
And the overall total output scale, we see this law of diminishing marginal output. We see the slope is higher at lower amounts of workers, but then the slope decreases for total output growth.
Yeah.
During the middle or the large amounts of workers.
Yeah.
Eventually, the slope is negative. And so, what does it exactly look like on a number-wise? So we see here, the marginal product of workers is first marginal physical product, like the literal amounts of raw output the worker creates in terms of
how many units
of output. And then marginal revenue product, which is basically how much marginal revenue they make from their marginal physical product. Assuming in this case revenue is constant per unit of good or service.
Sure.
And so, let's say the first worker adds a marginal physical product of 80 units of output.
Yeah.
And if per unit of output there's about 5 units,
$5 per piece.
$5 per output or $5 per unit of output as revenue. So the marginal revenue product of the first worker is 400 because 80 times 5 is 400.
Yeah.
So for the second worker, the marginal physical product is 98. The marginal revenue is 5, and so 98 times 5 is marginal revenue product of the second worker, 490. So they create an additional marginal revenue of $490 for the firm, the second worker that is.
Yeah.
And so we keep going down until that marginal revenue product equals the marginal cost of the labor, which is basically their salary or their wage.
Yeah, their wage. Yeah.
And so see by around the seventh worker, the marginal revenue product is only 320, which is less than the marginal cost of that seventh worker, which is still 360. And so that seventh worker would not be a very economically viable choice for the firm because they are actually harming or reducing overall returns or overall profit for the firm.
Yeah, because it just does not make sense to hire more employees, right? Yeah. So we can see actually the MRP, marginal revenue product, actually follows the same pattern. Yeah. First, it's increasing, right? 400, 490, 580, but after the fourth employee, it becomes go down. Although still positive, it goes down. And actually, for the 10th new employee, the marginal revenue product is very, pity. It's only 10, right?
But by the 11th employee, it's probably negative at that point.
Yeah, but we still have to pay $360 for that new employee. So it's apparently,
Not worth it.
Yeah, worth it. So.
And so demand for labor, basically on the graph, we see demand for labor is basically equated or linked to its marginal revenue product of labor.
Yeah.
We see basically the marginal revenue product equates the demand curve in this case, and the marginal cost of labor is fixed at 360, which is their salary or wage per worker, assuming all workers are the same in this case.
Yeah.
And so the profit maximization, as we basically inferred in the last slide, is basically where marginal cost of labor or marginal fixed cost labor into wage equals to marginal revenue product of labor or just demand curve for labor. And so it meets at about just over 6. So realistically, we hire 6 workers.
Yeah. So this actually just a graphic interpretation of the previous slide.
Yeah.
We just put the data into this and then we get this. It's pretty simple. Still the same one. Marginal revenue equals marginal cost of the labor, right? So.
And so for overall labor market for a certain industry or firm, we see product demand of labor increases from D1 to D2 for basically many different reasons. One, productivity increases. So productivity increases, let's say the workers are more productive, each worker's marginal physical product or marginal product increases. So we see here, instead of the first worker having only 80 MPP, it would have he or she would have about 90 or even 100 marginal physical product, which would increase that marginal revenue to 450 to 500.
It could happen because, for example, you have new software.
Yeah.
Just for example, right?
So for the second worker, maybe that marginal physical product goes from 98 to about 110, 120, which increases our marginal revenue product as well.
That certainly shifts the demand curve to the right.
Yes,
right?
Increases demand. And so also changes the price of other factors. Let's say for labor, there are also many substitute resources for labor and complementary resources for labor. Substitute resource for labor would be automation, which is a very hot topic right now in the economy. Automation, let's say the price of automated robots increases. Well, these robots are now less viable or less optimal compared to manual labor. And so manual labor, the demand for manual labor increases when the price of robots increase as well, because the price of robots increase, they're less affordable for the firm, so the firm turns back to manual labor and demand for labor increases again.
Exactly.
For complementary resources like lumber price, right? So workers, for instance, construction workers or workers who are building a house, for instance, when lumber price decreases, they have more lumber to work with because lumber is more affordable for the firm. When they have more lumber resources or this type of capital to work with, their productivity increases and more workers are also hired.
Yeah. So basically that's why D1 could be shifted to the D2. There are several, the external factors that could affect that demand for the labor.
And we see these substitute complementary resources are basically the same concepts we see in traditional aggregate demand, aggregate supply, or demand and supply models for any other good or service, not just a factor like labor.
Yeah, it's a pretty classical interpretation of the demand and supply.
So for final clues, demand for labor is basically derived or directly linked to marginal revenue product of labor. They're basically almost the same thing. Shifts are due to product demand. For instance, when the product demand increases, then marginal revenue for each good increases, price increases. And so marginal revenue product increases per worker as well. They are also linked towards productivity. So when productivity increases, the marginal physical product increases as well. And finally, the link to complementary and substitute goods of other resources or other capital that competes or works with labor.
It's pretty much, if you review our early episode, it's kind of like deja vu of our discussion of the classical demand and supply curve. But now we focus on the labor. A very important factor of production, right? Okay, see you next time. Bye-bye.